and welcome to a special Memorial Day episode of the Ohana Packers Edition podcast, the podcast where two dudes from halfway around the world talk everything green and gold. I'm Mike, and that's Iowa Joe. And Joe, what do you got in store for us today?
Well, in usual fashion, this is the time of year where we continuously have nothing else to talk about. But being this is Memorial Weekend, I figured we would talk a little bit about the Packer players who served in the U.S. military. So, and I want to put this disclaimer out there: there's probably more of them out there than we know of. These are just ones that I was able to do general searches on, and were able to find out things about them being in the service at some point or the other. Obviously, more of them were during like World War II and a little bit of Korea and that. But yeah, I figured we would go about being that even though this will release on the Tuesday after Memorial Day, but we're recording the Sunday before Memorial Day. So we would just sit here and do a little show about some of the guys that played for the Packers and also were part of the armed services.
Yep. So Joe, you take the lead on this one. Yeah, it's been a relatively quiet day overall. Just going to the current Packers, it's been a relatively quiet week. Biggest news is that they had really good turnout at OTAs. I guess the shocker is that Kingsley Enigbari was is fully cleared for OTAs. He's missing no time going into the into training camp. And Jordan Love still hasn't signed his extension as of the time we're recording this. But like I said, I do think that they're waiting for June 2nd when Devondre Campbell's money comes off the cap, so that Russ Ball and Gutekunst can do some front loading or just maneuvering with his money on that one. So I think it's a matter of when, not if. But otherwise, Joe, this is your show to run today. What you got?
Well, like I said, we're just going to do a run through on some of the guys that serve. Some are well known, some are kind of not known because, some of these guys played, nearly 80 years ago. And, not many of the players, let alone people who watch the players, are still around and can tell you much about them. I guess I'm not sure the format we're going to go with, but let's just start with some of the ones that are the well-known. So let's just kick it off with Tony Canadeo. Obviously, he's, a Packer Hall of Famer, Pro Football Hall of Famer.
Number three is retired by the Packers. Yep.
Yeah. So this is just a little write-up that I found on a website, and I forgot to write down the website, so I'm not properly sourcing everything. But this was explained by Packers Hall of Famer curator Brent Hensel. Quote, he missed most of the 1944 season and all of 1945 while serving in World War II. In fact, he tells a story where he came home on furlough. His wife had just had a baby. And then he actually stays a couple weeks longer, saying that his wife not feeling well, and they kind of made it up so he could spend more time with the child for obvious reasons. Then he would return in 1946 to lead the Packers in rushing in the ground attack, eventually retiring in 1952. So I guess we could go through a history lesson on Tony Canadeo, but really, he was, again, like I said, he's a two-time Hall of Famer, Packer, and Pro Football. Mike said it. His number was retired and is in the Ring of Honor, or the Packers Ring of Honor. So that one's probably the most well-known or one of the most well-known. The other one that's probably the biggest known by a lot of people that are still active in the Packers community. And I'm going to lump these three together because, like I told Mike when I was doing a little bit of research, I knew it about one of them, but I didn't know about the other two. And that's Paul Hornung, Boyd Dowler, and Ray Nitschke. Now, I knew the Paul Hornung story where, he got called up and Lombardi had to try to call in favors to get him to not be sent anywhere in active duty and he could continue to play out his contract. But I didn't know that Boyd Dowler and Ray Nitschke were part of that. all three of them. This is a quote from Boyd Dowler. We had three guys, me included, that were called up into the Army in the mid-season. Paul Horning, Ray Nitschke, and I were all called up into the Army when they activated the Wisconsin National Guard unit in the 32nd Division. They activated the division and we were called in by the middle of the season. So that's three huge names on the Green Bay Packers that were called up in the middle of the season to
The 61 season.
In the 61 season for active duty. And, and the story goes on that Vince Lombardi actually phoned then President John Kennedy and asked him for a favor to get them to at least be able to come back to play in games. And it worked for Dowler and Nitschke, but I do think, based on what it says in this article and the other stuff that I found, that Horning did miss like 1 or 2 games because of being on active duty. But like I said, I had no idea Nitschke and Dowler were in it. I knew Horning because there's the famous pictures of Horning in uniform and all that stuff, but I didn't know it about the other two.
Basically, if you've watched any documentary on the 60s Packers, you've heard that story. So, but it, like you said, Joe, it generally does center more around the Horning part of it, not Nitschke and Dowler. And that, honestly, it was kind of huge that Lombardi was able to pull that kind of a sway, because that's their first title season under Lombardi. So to have been potentially missing those 3 players would have been potentially catastrophic for that team. So Lombardi with the I've got a number for a guy doesn't get higher than being able to call JFK and say like, hey, I need these 3. So yeah, it just goes under the footnote of another cool footnote in Packers history there.
Yeah, and I honestly, I'm going to be truthful here that I didn't do a ton of research in it, but the way it sounds from the stories that I was reading, somehow Lombardi knew Kennedy.
Yeah.
And that's the only reason he was able to make that phone call. And because it's not like any other coach in the world could call up the sitting president and say, hey, you can't send my boys over there. You got to let them stay here so they can finish out their contract.
Yep.
Mike, why don't you talk about this one here while I do a couple more things with I just highlighted it in the notes.
Yes. So Kevin Green, so former outside linebackers coach Kevin Green, I believe the story that he tells is that his brother, he had uncles and his dad were in the Marines military. I forget what branch of the military, but they had served with valor in previous wars. And so his older brother, I believe, was in the military, and then so Kevin decided that he would enroll in ROTC while he was at Auburn, and excuse me, he was
wait a minute, I gotta stop you. What did you call that?
Huh?
What did you call that? ROTC?
Yeah,
I've never heard it called ROTC. It's always been called ROTC. I've never heard it called ROTC.
Okay, so I guess in Hawaii we love to shorten everything down, and including not, I guess, saying the letters within the letters within an anagram or anything. So yeah, of course the J in for high school is for JROTC. It's JROTC, but yeah. So Kevin Green joined ROTC.
I honestly have never heard it called ROTC. I've known people who have been in ROTC, and it's always just returned. Even they called it ROTC. They never called it ROTC.
So Kevin Green joined ROTC while he was at Auburn, and he was commissioned as a second lieutenant in the Alabama Army National Guard. And after his first season playing with the Rams, he graduated from Army Officer Basic Course at Fort Knox. So, excuse me. And in subsequent years, during the off seasons while Green was in the NFL, He elevated himself to the rank of captain, completed paratrooper school at Fort Benning. So I don't believe he was ever deployed, but
Yeah,
Green
he was
was.
never, as everything that I read, he was never sent overseas, but he, I think it was after his playing career or even during his playing career, he made a point to go with the USO to visit troops everywhere. So even though he was never sent on active duty or anything like
Yeah.
that, he did do his best to go out on
Yeah,
those.
lot of outreach. Yeah, like I said, he has deep patriotic ties from his family. So, and if you watch like Kevin Green's Football Life, the NFL Network show documentary series, he speaks pretty highly about that for a good segment of that of his episode. So, good stuff from Kevin Green, and honestly, gone far too early. We lost the great one when he passed away. What was that, 2 or 3 years ago now?
Yeah, it's been a little bit now, but yeah. So now, before I jump in and say any more, are there, other than the ones that I have listed, do you know of any other Packers with military ties to them?
No. I guess the big one, the big recent one is Aaron Jones with his dad. I don't know of guys
Right.
who
Well,
themselves
his
served.
mom
It's been
and
a
his
lot of,
dad.
yeah, it's been a lot of players who have like parents or that family members kind of thing, but not they themselves who served or are on active not active duty necessarily, but are in the National Guard or anything like that. So no, I don't believe there have been any, in our recent decades who fit that bill.
Well, there's one, and if you look at the
Oh
notes, it's
yes,
right above them. Is
yeah,
there's Darren College, and I
yeah,
love that. I love the story that about how he joined. He had just, from what I read on it, when he signed his contract with the Cardinals, he was already talking about it, about joining the military at that point. Because I think, like you said with Kevin Green, it was the same thing with college, that he had a brother or somebody that was already in the military, and he just kept saying, "Well, I'll be there soon. I'll be there soon." So when college finally retired, he immediately signed up for the Army National Guard, and I don't have it wrote down here, but I believe he was part, or he is, or was part of the uh, a helicopter crew, a
yep,
medvac. Um, so it that's one of those things that he didn't have to really work the rest of his life just because he had made decent enough money played long enough in the NFL, but he still had that calling to join the military.
yep. And those pictures are pretty awesome because college obviously slimmed down post playing
Yeah.
career, but he's still a pretty big dude in those pictures, and he sticks out from his the rest of his helicopter crew. But yeah, yeah, all I've got to say is kind of like you brought up, Joe, is these are all guys who can live, with their feet up after their playing career. Honestly, probably should because of the wear and tear on their bodies.
Yeah.
But you got to commend, Kevin Green's a guy who had a 15-year career, is something like third or fourth all time in sacks in NFL history, since they started recording them in 1982 or whatever the year was. And college had a successful like 9-year playing career or something like that. But props to guys like that who say, yeah, I've got another calling in life, and it's my turn now to serve my country, and we owe them every bit of gratitude for stepping up to the plate and serving America.
And that's really the whole point of this episode today. Is it's going to seem like we're a mess and all that stuff trying to talk about this stuff, but it's just showing respect for what these guys did, whether they did it in the middle of their career, whether they did it prior to playing football or after playing football. It just to show a little bit of respect for that stuff on a weekend that a lot of people visit the cemeteries and stuff like that, putting flowers on the graves and just doing their rounds. So this is just kind of our way of doing that. So like I said, there are a ton of guys that we're probably not even going to get to just because, the Packers have been around since 1919. They're going to have numerous guys that have played football and been in the military. We're just trying to hit guys that we're trying to, people either know and didn't know they were in the military, or guys that are just kind of, they're fading out of modern memory. So I'm going to combine these two together just because they've got kind of local ties for me. And one of them I haven't been able to find anything on other than he served a 6-month tour in the Army. I haven't been able to really find it, but that's Mr. Bob Harlan. And for anybody who knows, he's basically the guy that was credited with the resurgence of the Green Bay Packers. Had it not been for him, who knows what the Packers would be today? Even they might not even be the Packers if it had not been for Bob Harlan. The reason why I say it's kind of local ties is because he was born and raised in Des Moines, Iowa. But from what I was reading, from like birth, he was also a Packers fan, that he always wanted to have something to do with the Packers. So, yeah, Mr. Bob Harlan. Again, I don't know much about his active time in the military. Just that it was a 6-month tour, so it must have been cut short for some reason or another. I don't know why, but and to tie in with that is Emlyn Tunnel, and he's going to be a guy that not a lot of people are going to know. Born and raised in the Philadelphia area, he played at the University of Tulsa. Well,
sorry,
good Lord, that was a loud one.
That one came out of nowhere.
I give that a 6 because you sound like you were stressed on that one. But he played at Toledo for a year, but then he transferred to the University of Iowa for the 46 and 47 season. But between 1943 and 1946, he served in the United States Coast Guard, receiving the Silver Life-Saving Medal for heroism and rescuing a shipmate from flames during a torpedo attack in 1944 and rescuing another shipmate who fell into the sea in 1946. He played 14 total seasons in the NFL. He played for the Packers between 1959 and 1961. So while he's not probably going to be a guy that most people are going to know, that's part of Packers history. And again, like we said earlier, to be in the war and then come out and play another 14 years in the NFL is something else. And, just some of the things he did, some of his accolades in the NFL is he was selected as first team All-Pro 6 times and played in 9 Pro Bowls. He was a member of the NFL championship teams in 56 and 61. When he retired as a player, he held the NFL career records for interceptions at 79, interception return yards for 1,282, punt returns at 258, and punt return yards for 2,209. So I know he's got a little bit more love out of the Packers recently when they revamped the Packers Hall of Fame. I know they put a section in there that has a big old picture of him on it, and they're African Americans in the NFL thing for the Packers Hall of Fame. So he's getting a little bit more out there. He's still in the in the realm of notability because there are still people around. But like I said, these are the old timers that are starting to fade from modern memory. Yep. I'll let you talk about this one since he's another one that's a little bit of a known. Most people should at least know the name. I'll even let you pull up the military wiki for him.
Mr. McNally? Does anyone know him by his actual name?
No.
Oh, sorry.
The one that I put in the private chat.
Yeah. So, yes. Excuse me. So, Joe has given me the distinction of being able to talk about Mr. Clark Hinkle. So, he was one of the early, from the early dynasty under Lambeau himself. Excuse me. Oh, one of the obviously this is an era where everyone played two ways, but Hinkle was the second team fullback behind Bronco Nagurski, often, and excuse me, he was hailed by Lambeau as the greatest football player of his era. So Hinkle, sorry, I'm just struggling reading right now.
Well, I don't know. You look like you're stressing out again. Are you going to let another burp loose here pretty quick?
So Hinkle was drafted in where is it? Oh, this is lovely radio. So yes.
Well, he wasn't drafted. He was signed.
He was
by
enlisted.
Lombardi.
Sorry. Yeah, he's a. Oh no. Into military service. He was enlisted. He enlisted in the Coast Guard in 1942, and he did not return to the Packers after World War II. But you figure too, at that point, he was, this is in the early 1900s. So by the time World War II ends, he is 36. So Hinkle playing football at that age, he would have been the quote unquote medical marvel of his time. But just another, like you said, he just adds to the list of Packers players who found another calling, after their playing career to go and serve America. And we thank him for his service to the U.S., both the Packers and the United States.
And most people are still going to know his name because it is Hinkle Field is the outdoor practice field for the Packers. So yes. Clark Hinkle still got his name out there. He is another one that is a Pro Football and Packers Hall of Famer. He did, he helped the Packers to 3 NFL championships between 36 and 39. And like you said, according to this, he did leave. He did stop playing in 42 to join the military. So, that's also got to be something that's hard. You go through and play all that time and you're a well-known player and you just cut that short to go in and I know the big one that everybody talks about nowadays is Pat Tillman and, the sad facts that happened with him. But to be honest, he wasn't that, I don't want to say not that great a player because he was a good player. It just, he wasn't a named player. It wasn't like, to use a basketball term, it wasn't like Kobe Bryant saying, I'm done playing basketball and now I'm going to go play, go into the military, or a Brett Favre saying, I'm done, I'm going to go in. Well, that would be what Clark Hinkle was back in those days. Yeah. That was Brett Favre saying, I'm retiring, I'm going to go into the military in a time of need for my country. Yep. Or Joe Montana or Peyton Manning or Tom Brady saying, I've had a good run, but my country needs me and I'm going to go serve and fight.
Yeah. And just remember that, we're talking about quarterbacks now, but this is in the era where no one threw the ball. So that's why we're pointing now quarterbacks. But at the time that Hinkle played, it was all about fullbacks and halfbacks. So,
well, and I'm not even using it as the same position. I'm just talking about like the notoriety with them.
Yeah.
So if you want to go by somebody named for, this would have been like Barry Sanders when he retired early saying, I've had a good run, but now I'm going to go into the Army.
Or if Derrick Henry said, I'm going to retire to go fight the war on terror right now.
Right. So that's kind of the level we're looking at with Clark Hinkle, because like you said, he was only second to Bronco Nagurski. So, he was one of the top players in the league at that time frame. So now this one I'm going to talk about, but there's not much to him. With regards to like military stories and stuff like that. But the more I got to reading of them, it may be, if one of these days we could ever get a hold of like the Packers historians or somebody from the Packers Hall of Fame or something to talk about, and that is Johnny McNally. or what people know as Johnny Blood, because there's a list of this wiki page has it listed as legendary antics from Johnny Blood. Like one of them is he jumped a narrow ledge 6 stories from the ground to gain access to a Los Angeles hotel room. He was fleeing a towel fight with Packers in Lavie Dillwig by climbing on top of a fast moving train and crawling across car tops. Playing almost entire game with a collapsed kidney. Having to be rescued by teammates while attempting chin-ups on the stern's flagpole of the ocean liner SS Mariposa while traveling across the Pacific Ocean for a barnstorming game in Hawaii. So that's just a few things that are listed as legendary stories for Johnny Blood McNally. But he did, he was in the military. He did play for the Packers for a while. Let's see, it says, I'm trying to get this right because some of these guys, like we said, played a little bit, went to the military, and then went back and played a little bit more. So he played for the Packers between 1929 and 1933. He and this is another story here. When Coach Curly Lambeau first negotiated a contract with McNally to play for the Packers, he offered him $110 a week if he wouldn't drink after Wednesday and $100 a week if he did. McNally allegedly took the $100, although a later story said Lambeau said he would give him the $110 and let him drink on Wednesday for being so honest about it. So this guy had to have been some kind of character. So this would be an awesome, awesome article if we could ever find somebody that we could talk to about it. According to this article, McNally wore several different uniform numbers during the Packers' career, including 14, 20, 24, 26, and 55. Let's see. I'm trying to pull up everything here. I'm trying to get his military stuff.
So the day December 8th, 1941, he enlisted in the Army Air Corps, served in India as a cryptographer, and he post World War II tried to rejoin the Packers in 1945, but was injured returning a punt in an exhibition game, and he retired permanently following that. So like we said, some guys tried to come back after, some guys just called it a career afterward. Unfortunately, McNally tried to make his comeback, but was injured in doing so.
And for some of those people out there that don't know, the Army Air Corps was the predecessor to the actual Air Force. During World War II, they didn't have an Air Force. They just had like the Army Air Corps. And then later on, it became its own part of the military in the Air Force. So, and at that time, the Army Air Corps were more of your pilots. They were your ground crewmen, your mechanics, your stuff like that. I know a little bit about it because my dad's dad was actually in the Army Air Corps during World War II. So, and he was a mechanic on planes. So I know the story was that he worked on the B-52 bomber so much that he always said that if he had the money and the material, he could build one himself. So without plans. But yeah, like I said, Johnny, if you guys want to do a little bit of reading on it, Johnny McNally is definitely somebody to read upon, because just reading some of these stories about him, it just, yeah, it'll
put a chuckle. It'll put a chuckle
climbing
down soul.
Climbing down the face of a hotel in downtown Chicago to avoid curfew and recite poetry to the swooning women below. I mean, that just tells it all right there. Or another one is he once passed up an opportunity to purchase an NFL franchise for $1,200.
and for those thinking he must have kicked the bucket early. Johnny Blood lived till he was
he lived
85. So
yeah, he lived a
yeah.
long time. Let's see. We've only got a few more to talk about because, like I said, this is really just a mismatch for of a show because we're running out of things and we were trying to just do something on topic for the weekend. You got Bob Forte, who was 11th round pick out of Arkansas in 1943. He played both halfback and defensive back. And during World War II, he was a tank battalion officer in Europe. And he also served a year during the Korea War. So, you know, that's another thing that always amazes me is some of these guys that served in multiple wars, you know, like Bob Forte, World War II in Korea, some of them Korea, Vietnam, some of them 3-time, you know, World War II, Korea, and Vietnam. This last one that I'm going to talk about, I don't know if Mike, you want to look up a couple more or something, but this one I do want to kind of talk about just because of the, I don't know if you want to call it seriousness, but this is one of the few that I've actually seen that was a casualty in a war and never made it back to the United States, and that's Howard Smiley Johnson. He played guard for the Packers in 1940 and 41, and then I think he was enlisted into the military as a Marine. He was a Marine officer and was killed in action while leading Marines into the Battle of Iwo Jima. And that was in 1945. And you know, a lot of people are going to know Iwo Jima from the very popular picture of the Marines who are hoisting the flag up on the hill. And, you know, so that one, like I said, so out of all the guys that I've looked up and all the ones that I was trying to find, so far he's the only one that I know of that never made it back, who died in action. And, you know, that's really what this weekend is about, is remembering those that never, you know, didn't make it home.
Yeah, another one who had a hard time during World War II was Harold Van Every. He played 2 seasons with the Packers before joining the military. He, like you said, was in what would become the Air Force, but he was a bomber pilot, and he was shot down over Germany and basically served out the rest of the war as a POW in Germany, but made it back to the U.S. and actually lived to the age of 89 when he passed away in 2007. So just another, like you said, another guy who gave up his career to serve America. And, you know, and okay, like, I know that back when a lot of the guys that we're talking about were playing, you know, it didn't pay to be a football player really, but still it means something to give up what is your, you know, your first love, your, you know, the thing you love doing most, to go and serve your country. I know that, you know, some of these were drafted individuals, but there are several handfuls on this list who are guys who were either post career or during their career decided that that it was time to serve America. So we give them our gratitude, and, you know, just like you said, for Memorial Day, we give them the honor that they deserve.
Yeah, and I was going to look something else up because I guess during Korea and like between the 1950-51 season or something like that, or 51-52 season, the Packers actually lost the most players out of any team to the military, and it was like 11 or 12 of their rostered players went into the military at that time. So I was trying to find the article again, but it's not wanting to pull up.
And just no offense, that's not the reason that the Packers sucked in the 50s.
No, but it also does explain a little bit of why the franchise was held down until Lombardi came in, because the then GM and coach were making trades to try to get rid of the ones that were going into the military and bringing in younger guys that were going to stay around. Like, I think one of them was Babe Parilli, that they traded to Cleveland. They traded draft picks. They traded everything just to try bringing guys in to replace the ones that they were losing. And they lost like 3 guys off the line. I know Forrest Gregg was one of them. I can't remember the other 2 off the top of my head. I wish, like I said, I wish I could find that page again, because yeah, they I like one guy's name was Tiny Calhoun, and they just had a ton of guys that they lost during the Korea. Well, I guess at the time they called it a conflict, but it's an actual war. I was hoping to find this again, but it's not wanting to pull up. But yeah, so this definitely is a good thing to research. I wish we would have done a little bit better so we could produce a little bit of a better show for you guys. But it definitely opens your eyes to that these guys were still these guys were completely different than the players that we're seeing today. And that's not to say that players that we're seeing today are bad players or bad people or whatever. But back then, it wasn't all about the sport. It was about everything else, because they weren't making the millions and millions and millions of dollars to play the sport, and that they still had to go out and find ways of surviving, and they still were, trying to
the NFL was a rec league for all, it was the equivalent of a rec league that, made like a stipend per se. These guys all had jobs as like meat packers, or like, some kind of like mailmen or something like that. They all had a separate job. I forget who it was on the Lombardi Packers, but a few of them were like bouncers or security guards or stuff like that. So yeah, guys all had other, the NFL was like second or third on the tier of like job order in terms of, their income on a yearly basis. So that's kind of what Joe's trying to point out, where it was just a different time, pre 1980, really, being an NFL athlete versus, what else is going on in America.
That, and a lot of people had different views on the sport, period, anyway. It was just a rec league. It wasn't a life that, when, in a time of need for the country, when, World War II was going on, they said, well, fuck football. We're going to go and do our duty. Whereas now, I'm not saying these guys wouldn't, but they'd be passing up multi-millions of dollars to be doing it, where those guys were just like, we're not doing anything that is stopping us, and we need to go do this.
Yep, absolutely.
That's about all. I mean, there are, like I said, there's another coach, Dan Devine. He's another one that
the greatest coach in the history of the Packers.
Yeah, where they blame him, or which is true, that he really sold out the franchise thinking he was going to be this amazing coach, and it didn't happen. But he served in the military for a while. Obviously, that was in the dreaded 70s that he was the head coach. They like to put on it that, they wouldn't get another franchise quarterback until Favre showed up in 91. He famously in 74 traded 2 first-round picks, 2 second-round picks, and a third-round pick for 34-year-old quarterback John Hadle from the Rams. So, yeah, and he believed that they were just a quarterback away, and it ended up being they were more than just a quarterback away.
I think the story behind Hadle is like, there was a scout who was basically like, his arm is toast, and it's like, oh, the trade's already through. Oh, Jesus.
Well, if that's the story on that one, that would not be the only time, because I know Jason Wilde was very well known to tell the story that about Bob Harlan when they were going to be drafting a quarterback in the first round. It was like in the early '80s or mid '80s or something like that, and everybody's in the room cheering and all that. That they got the player that they want, and the West Coast scout goes, he can't throw, and Bob Harlan's like, what are you talking about? He goes, his arm's shot, he can't throw, and he's like, you didn't say this before, and he said, who cares?
Yep.
So that just shows the different time. People, we're spoiled now with the way the Packers are run.
Yep. It's all across on all levels, but the main thing that we wanted to point out is there's been a lot of players who had direct or honestly not even just players, but just players, personnel who with direct ties to the Packers who have gone outside of football to find their calling, and we appreciate and want to put a little honor on all of their names for defending this country that we all live in, and enjoy the freedoms that come with being an American citizen. So we appreciate.
So let's add
their
a little
service to the
personal
US.
touch here, Mike. Let's add a little personal touch here. Do you have anything you do on Memorial Weekend, or is it just the typical barbecue and stuff like that?
Well, now I call my father-in-law because my father-in-law is a Navy veteran. He hit mandatory retirement years, but he served. He was in the Navy. He was a corpsman. I can't even name all of the the different conflicts that he was a part of, but he landed in Somalia. He served Desert Storm, Desert Freedom, basically through Afghanistan, and just the imprint it's had on my wife's life, her brother's lives, and her mom's life, and just seeing how dedicated they all were to they have a lot of fun with it, the fighting the war at home and all those kind of jokes and stuff like that. But there is when my now father-in-law retired, Marisol and I had been dating for about a year and a half at that point, and I'd never been to a military retirement ceremony before, and it was very you see they do the whole step ashore request and all that kind of stuff when you're retiring out of the Navy, and it's very, very humbling, very moving to see in person. And then more directly in my family, both of my grandfathers served in the Army. My mom's dad was drafted. The highest irony for a Japanese American. On my mom's side, my maternal grandmother's family was interned. Tule Lake was the longest internment they faced, and then my paternal grandfather was drafted into the Army, and luckily his number came up to where he got drafted in July of 1945. So his service in World War II was security on the ships as they did Operation Magic Carpet, which is the Pacific campaign to bring all of the military personnel home from the different Pacific islands following Japan's surrender in September of 45. So that like I said, the irony is thick for someone who knows what happened to Japanese Americans. Luckily, my grandma's family, they didn't, I don't want to say they came out unscathed, but they all survived internment. They all lived well past internment. My great grandmother passed away in 98, and my grandma and her siblings were late 90s, and up until last year my grandma passed away. But just hearing the stories about that. But yeah, my grandpa served, and he jokes that he was the fastest. He was one of the fastest. How did he put it? Basically, he was promoted to sergeant faster than anyone in his unit had ever in the history of World War II. That was what he always touted himself as. And then my paternal grandfather was he was drafted for the Korean War, and he never told my dad. Unfortunately, he passed in when he was just 64, but in the mid 90s. But he never gave my dad a straight answer on it. But my dad is pretty certain that the army gave my grandpa his reason for his fear of flying because um, he was on a transport plane. I think it was just a training exercise, and they had a bird strike and took out one of their engines. So
Wow.
near crash landing, and so my grandma had all these pictures of my grandpa where like she would go on trips with her siblings and stuff like that. My grandpa would just drop them off at the airport and leave. He's like, my feet are not coming off the ground. So, but like I said, I, you know, there's different sides of it. My father-in-law, he jokes that it was his avenue to becoming an American citizen because he basically, he came to the US with his older sister who had gotten a student visa, and his older sister and younger brother, they're all American citizens now. But my father-in-law jokes that they were in New York and he saw some other Navy guy, some other seamen in their dress uniforms, and he was like, "Yeah, I'm gonna do that, and that's how I'm gonna be an American." And my father-in-law, he's a first generation American, but I do tout that he is more patriotic than a lot of people who spout all kinds of hate on social media and things like that. And he is a true American hero, and I just want to say like how grateful I am to everyone who served. Everyone who anyone who listens to this show, watches this show, just say to anyone in your family, anyone classmates. I've got a classmate who was wounded in Afghanistan, shot by a sniper. So but luckily he's still with us. So he just trains Marines now. But just want this is my, like you said earlier, this is my rambling way to say I, from the bottom of my heart, appreciate all that everyone who serves in the military does to keep us all as safe as possible. I know there's people who say like, oh, bad things still happen and blah blah blah, but it's been tried and true basically since America has really established itself as a world power, that it's like, you screw around with us and we will come and slam the door on you. So, and with it's on the back of people who some are drafted, some enlist, but to all of those who have served and who do serve currently, thank you from the bottom of my heart.
Yeah, and see, I have to say that on both certain branches on both sides of my mom and dad's families, there's been family members who have served in every conflict in the United States going back to the French and Indian Wars in the early the mid 1700s. So I mean, you name a conflict and I can probably give you a relative that served in it, that direct tie down to me, all the way through to the most recent, what did they call it? Operation Freedom for Iraqi, whatever. And then currently my best friend is in the military and all that stuff. But, it just, it's one of those things that it does affect people's lives in certain ways, some for the good, some for the worst. And, we've got stories all the way through, like, one of my dad had 4 aunts and her mom, and all 5 of the sisters married veterans or married guys that were in the military. And one of them was a good man, a really great man. I mean, he was one of the nicest guys you ever want to meet. Name was Tom Croft. Uncle Tom was amazing, and he always loved to tell his war stories from World War II, and he had such a amazing career with it that you wouldn't believe it if you actually didn't see the documentations with it, where he was on the USS Arizona in Pearl Harbor, but it was before Pearl Harbor happened, and he ended up transferring off the Arizona, and then shortly after is when Pearl Harbor happened. Well, he ended up going to the USS Munson, and it got sunk during the Battle of Guadalcanal. And so this guy, and then he had Purple Hearts, and he still had shrapnel in him from until the day he died, and he had plates in his head from a lot of the damage he suffered. But I found out, both me and my dad found out later, that he actually got the plates in his head and then went back and served another tour of duty. And so he loved talking about his stuff. And I remember when he was really going downhill, I was sitting in the house with him, and they had his medals and stuff in a shadow box on the wall. And I go, Uncle Tom, why don't you tell me about the medals? And he goes, I have no clue what they're all about. But he goes, you see those little chunks of metal in there underneath them? I said, yeah. He goes, those are some of the only pieces of the USS Munson that made it back to the United States. And they came out of me. But I tell that story because he loved telling about it. But then Dad said one of the other uncles absolutely refused to talk about anything with the military because it was just some of the worst times he ever had. And he went through some of the worst situations he ever went through. So he would never talk about it. You couldn't drag it out of him.
Yeah.
So it just, and then there's stories of guys or family members that went through World War II that just had World War I that just had such traumatic things that they came back, at the time they called it shell shock. Now it's PTSD. That, it's heartbreaking in a way. Some of these guys have, even though they go through traumatic stuff, they still had a good time in there. But some of these guys really struggle. So if you're one of those that's in the military right now, or you served during the country or anything, and you're having a hard time, reach out to somebody. There's always somebody there that will listen. Yeah. They may not be able to understand it, but they're willing to listen. They're willing to talk to you about it. They can at least help you find an avenue to get the help that you need if you're needing it. You don't have to go through it alone.
No. And like Joe said, everyone's going to deal with it their own way, but and for those of you that aren't in the military, always check in on your friends. You don't have to be like in a nagging way, and you don't, you can give them the ask them once how it was kind of thing and stuff, or if they want to talk about it and all. But just try to take them out and just ask them if there's anything they want to do. If it's just go grab a drink, grab food, or anything like that. It doesn't have to be anything special. But my father-in-law tells the story about how one of the master sergeants who was, because my father was a master chief, he was in charge of hotel deployments on the front lines kind of thing. And so, he would have a master sergeant attached to him as his security detail. And he tells the story of how one of them, he committed suicide from PTSD after the war. And, my father-in-law feels a little guilty about it because he said he saw him a couple of months before it happened. He didn't know and stuff. But so it's just never know what's going on inside someone's head. So always just reach out and, try to just be there for these people because from what I've heard from some of my friends who served, it's a lonely feeling when you come home from deployment. So just like we say, check on all your friends. Don't want to say you have to tier them or anything like that, but especially your friends who have served, you don't know how okay they are, despite what they say. So check in on your friends, check in on your family, tell them you love them and you appreciate them. So yeah, that's
or if you're like me, you just ignore them because you don't like your family anyway. So but no, like Mike said, if they don't want to talk about it, you don't force them into talking about it. But on the flip side, if they want to talk about it, let them talk about it because they either enjoyed what they were going, especially if they're older ones. Like I said, some of the best times that I can remember is sitting down and just listening to Uncle Tom tell his war stories, and I knew it was good for him because he had somebody to tell him to.
Yeah.
My step grandpa, or he was never really step grandpa, he was always grandpa, was in the Navy during Korea. And he'd sit there and talk to you about some of the stuff that he went through on the ship or some of the things that they would do on the ship. And you would just, that I loved hearing the stories, but most of all, I knew they loved telling the stories because that was somebody that was wanting to listen to what they went through and what they were talking about.
Yeah. So I mean, the stories you can hear from the military, it's not just the like I sat in a foxhole for days kind of thing. Like my grandfather, like I said, my mom's dad, he tells the stories because he was on security detail on these transport ships. He just tells me about, like, he said the worst experience of his life was pulling into Guadalcanal, because he says you're at flank speed going into the harbor, and once you reach the harbor limit, the ship slows down. It's like opening an oven door in your face. And he goes, I hated it, and there's no AC. I was like, well, yeah, that's kind of a Navy vessel. And then my father-in-law recently, my Marisol had never heard this story before, and he kind of was shocked that he had never told her or his two sons this story about how he sweet talked this Navy pilot into taking him up in an F4 Phantom, and how my father-in-law proceeded to just plaster the entire cockpit with his vomit because the pilot took too many stunts on him, and how he had to be carried out of the cockpit because he was so out of it. So, I mean, some of them, some of the stories are definitely going to be more intense and stuff, but like you said, Joe, there are some stories that some of these veterans who, and it's not to say that they were dicking around. They need their escape while they're out there. When your life is on it's hanging on a thread for months of a deployment kind of thing. Those are the kind, you hear the stories about guys, doing whatever it is to take their mind off of how dangerous their situation is. So, I mean,
Right.
like I said, that was an absolute treat for my father-in-law to tell me his F4 Phantom story. And like I said, it was a shock to Marisol, where she was like, he never told me that. Like, she was like, he's never told that story before. And she's like, and I'm so glad that he did, because yeah, like you kind of alluded to, Joe, it would suck if he had never realized he never told that story, and Marisol and her brothers never knew that happened to their dad. So yeah.
Or there's a lot of people out there that once they're gone, the stories are no more.
Yeah.
So, it's kind of like going back to basic human history. The only reason we know what happened with some things is because people just kept telling the stories over and over again.
Yeah.
And, that's how we keep them. And like you said, some guys tell the stories about how they relaxed because they were going through such shit situations. Dad knew a guy that was served in World War II that was in the liberation of Sicily, and he parachuted in and he missed his drop, so he had to hide out. Well, he got in with a family of Italians, and they hid him in his basement for the duration. And he said that was some of the best food you could ever have, was what these Italians were just feeding him. Well, that's a good spin on a bad situation, because at any time somebody could have searched that basement and he would have never made it out.
Yep.
So, yeah, right now we're just rambling on, but really, like I said, listen to the stories, talk to these people, be there for them if they need to talk. Don't push them if they don't have to, but
yeah,
enjoy the stories. Don't just roll your eyes. Don't just stare at your phone. Listen to the stories and let them talk.
Yeah, absolutely. But like Joe said, that's going to put our wrap on our Memorial Day reflection episode. Please follow the podcast, Ohana_Packers, at Ohana_Packers on X, Twitter, whatever you want to call it these days.
It'll always be Twitter to me. Fuck Elon.
Yeah, I know. The bird. Oh! But you must be following the podcast Twitter handle to be eligible for our drawings or any sort of events we do hold in the future.
Brian said we're only like 68 away from our next goal. So
all right, we're getting close, everybody.
We're
tell
close.
Your friends, tell your family. But also, in order to see our weekly polls to kind of go into what we're talking about, like Joe said, we are pulling at absolute. We're
scraping the bottom of the barrel right now.
That is not to speak poorly on the military. We are very happy to do this episode.
No, but this one was one of the rare ones.
Next week, we are scraping not just the bottom of the barrel, we're scraping the label off the outside of the barrel.
This episode is one of those that you reach in the barrel and can't find anything, and then you luckily grab that last apple that's still good and
yes,
ripe, and then there's nothing left. Or when you're reaching into the cookie bag and you're like, I know there's only so many cookies, and you're just searching around for that last bit.
You're dragging your finger on the rows to get the dust from the Oreos, the Oreo cookies. But check out our website, ohanapackers.org. Joe has done a lot of hard work to get as we've changed over servers. Joe's done a lot of hard work to get the website working again. Check out the
and
streams.
Who knows if it even's still working.
It works. And if it doesn't, make sure you're able to tweet at the podcast, the handle, so that you can let us know.
Right.
If you're
we're gonna do this. We're gonna do this, Mike, and this is coming. Mike doesn't even know about this right now. If whoever's listening to this goes over to the website and buys a shirt, doesn't matter what shirt it is. It can be I'm a fucking Packer shirt. It can be I ain't afraid of the bear shirt. It can be Bo he did it shirt. It can be whatever shirt it is. If you go over and buy the shirt and let me know that website is working, and you can show me proof that you bought the shirt, you've got the shirt in, everything else, I will send you a shirt for free, just on top of it.
You heard it here first. But yep, check it out. Check out, we've got the blog posts, we've got the streams of the podcast episodes, got the shop, merch, get it, coffee, shirts, tumblers, coffee. That's the one we're sticking our claim on. But well,
what other podcasts have their own coffee? Now, come on now. We've got coffee.
And when they do, we'll just start adding trading cards to it. So we will escalate.
We'll find something. Maybe it'll be tea. I'll find some tea out there.
Oh, no. Please be following the podcast on your favorite podcasting apps. Give us a like and a subscribe if you're enjoying what you're hearing. Positive or negative feedback. We want to hear all your comments because we want to be producing the content that you want to hear. Again, we hope you all had a happy Memorial Day weekend. To all of you who have served or who are serving, we hope you have a safe and bountiful weekend. Go Pack Go, and aloha.